Could a seemingly ordinary man, known as the Candy Man for his sweet gesture, hide a gruesome secret? Dean Corll, a resident of Houston, appeared to be a friendly figure who ran a candy factory with his mother and generously handed out treats to local children. However, beneath this facade lay a chilling reality. Between 1970 and 1973, Corll orchestrated a reign of terror, brutally raping and murdering a minimum of 28 young men and boys. His sinister partnership with two teenage accomplices, whom he manipulated for his malevolent purposes, remained hidden until his death in 1973. This is the unsettling tale of Dean Corll and his descent into darkness. But before delving into that, we welcome you to our channel, where we provide you with the information about the serial killer of history. Without further ado, let's get started. The early life of Dean Corll. Dean Corll was born in 1939 in Fort Wayne, Indiana. His parents had a troubled marriage marked by frequent arguments, but there is nothing notably unusual about these disputes. Corll's father was known to be strict, but it is unclear whether the strictness ever crossed into abuse or punishments that were more severe than what was typical for the 1940s. On the other hand, Corll's mother showered him with affection. Corll's parents initially divorced in 1946, but briefly reconciled before divorcing again. After their second divorce, his mother decided to travel around the South and eventually remarried a traveling salesman. The family settled in Vidor, Texas. During his school years, Corll was described as a well-behaved but solitary young boy. His grades were apparently decent enough to avoid drawing attention, and he occasionally dated girls from his school or neighborhood. So how did this seemingly normal American boy of the 1950s transform into the infamous Candyman serial killer of the 1970s? Strangely, the connection between these two stories appears to be his mother's candy company. How Dean Corll became the Candyman. Dean Corll's mother and stepfather founded Pekin Prince Candies in the middle of the 1950s, first operating out of the family garage. Corll was instrumental in the firm from the outset. Corll and his younger brother ran the machinery that made the candy, while his mother oversaw the financial side of the enterprise, and his stepfather sold the candies on his sales route. Corll had worked at the candy store for several years by the time his mother divorced her second husband. Corll eventually went back to Indiana for a little while to help his grandmother, who had passed away. However, by 1962, he was prepared to return to Texas and support his mother in her new endeavor. Corll's mother founded the redesigned company, which was dubbed the Corll Candy Company, in the Houston Heights neighborhood. She designated his younger brother as the secretary-treasurer and Dean Corll as vice president. Corll served for around 10 months in the U.S. Army after being recruited in 1964, but he was able to obtain a hardship release by stating that he had to assist his mother at her business. Corll therefore kept working at the candy store for a few more years. Corll's employment with the corporation was not, however, as pure as it appeared. He showed indications of being interested in boys who were not quite old enough. One young adolescent kid who worked at the firm reportedly claimed to Corll's mother that Corll had made sexual attempts toward him, according to the book The Man with Candy. Corll's mother responded by firing the boy. In the meanwhile, it appeared that several adolescent guys were drawn to the candy factory, both as patrons and employees. A few of them were troublesome teens or fugitives. Dean Corll struck up a conversation with these teenagers quite fast. Corll even put a pool table in the back of the factory so that workers and their pals, many of whom were also young adolescent males, could hang around all day. It was said that Corll made numerous friends among the young people and was openly flirtatious with them. David Brooks, 12, was one among them. Like many kids, he was initially drawn to Corll by promises of sweets and a place to hang out. But Corll cultivated Brooks over the course of 2 years, gradually earning his confidence. By the time Brooks became 14 years old, Corll had become a habitual sexual abuser. rewarding the youngster with presents and cash in exchange for his quiet. The heinous crimes of the Candyman killer. During his horrifying crime spree in the early 1970s, Dean Corll, known as the Candyman, systematically targeted boys and young men aged 13 to 20 with the help of his accomplices David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Hanley. Corll's first known victim was Jeffrey Cohen, a student who accepted a ride from Corll while hitchhiking to his girlfriend's house. Corll often moved between apartments and rental houses, making it challenging to track his activities. In December, Corll abducted 2 teenage boys and assaulted them in his home, with Brooks stumbling upon the crime scene. Corll initially claimed he was part of a gay pornography ring, but he eventually confessed to Brooks that he had killed the boys. To buy Brooks' silence, Corll gifted him a Corvette and offered him money for every boy he could bring to him. Brooks agreed. Elmer Wayne Hanley was one of the boys Brooks introduced to Corll, but Corll chose not to kill him. Instead, he groomed Hanley to assist in his gruesome crimes, luring victims with promises of payment. Together, they used Corll's car or van, using candy, alcohol, or drugs to entice their victims. Once at Corll's home, the victims were bound, caged, and subjected to horrific abuse. They were tied to a torture board where they endured sexual assault. Most were either strangled or shot to death. Brooks later described Hanley as particularly sadistic. Why the victims' desperate parents got little help from the police. Dean Corll primarily targeted vulnerable and at-risk youths, but some of his victims came from loving families who were actively searching for them. One such victim, Mark Scott, vanished at the age of 17 on April 20, 1972. His concerned parents promptly reported his disappearance, reaching out to classmates, friends, and neighbors for any information. A few days later, the Scott family received a postcard, ostensibly penned by Mark, stating that he had found a job in Austin with a $3 per hour wage and that everything was fine. However, Mark's parents were skeptical, as they couldn't believe their son would leave town without a proper farewell. Despite their distress, they encountered little assistance from the Houston Police Department when their children went missing. Everett Waldrop, a grieving father, shared his heart-wrenching experience when his sons first disappeared, 15-year-old Donald and 13-year-old Jerry, both of whom fell victim to Corll. In the early 1970s in Texas, it was not illegal for a child to run away from home, and the chief of the Houston Police Department argued that there was nothing the authorities could do to aid these distraught families. However, following the revelation of Corll's murders to the public, this chief was subsequently voted out of office during the next election. The violent end of the Candyman killer. After almost 3 years and 28 confirmed murders, Dean Corll's reign of terror took a shocking turn on August 8, 1973, when he turned on Elmer Wayne Hanley. On that fateful day, Hanley had enticed 2 teenagers, Tim Curley and Rhonda Williams, to Corll's residence. Notably, Williams was the only girl among Corll's victims during this murder spree. Hanley later claimed that their initial intention was not to harm Williams or Curley. They were apparently there to socialize. The group indulged in heavy drinking and pain inhalation to achieve a high before they all fall asleep. Upon awakening, Hanley found himself bound alongside Curley and Williams, with Corll menacingly brandishing a .22 caliber pistol, threatening to kill Hanley before having his way with him. Corll then took Hanley to the kitchen to express his anger at Hanley for bringing a girl to his home. In response, Hanley implored Corll to release him, suggesting they could jointly harm Williams and Curley. Eventually, Corll united Hanley and took Curley and Williams to a bedroom to secure them to a torture board. As Corll put down his gun, Hanley seized the opportunity to grab the weapon, thereby putting an end to the crime spree. Williams, who survived the attack, and only publicly discussed it in 2013, recalled that Corll's behavior had deeply affected Hanley. Williams recounted, "He stood at my feet and suddenly told Dean that this could not continue. He couldn't allow him to keep killing his friends, and it had to stop." This declaration surprised Dean, who began to rise and challenge Hanley, saying, "You're not going to do anything to me." Without another word, Hanley shot Corll 6 times with the gun, ultimately ending the Houston mass murders. The aftermath of the Houston mass murders. Following the murder of Dean Corll, Hanley promptly contacted the police to confess his actions. He and Brooks subsequently provided official confessions detailing their involvement in the crimes and offered to assist the authorities in locating the victims' burial sites. However, Brooks denied any active involvement in the actual murders. Within the week, investigations recovered 17 bodies from makeshift graves and a boathouse shed. Subsequently, an additional 10 bodies were discovered on High Island Beach and in the woods near Lake Sam Rayburn. The 28 victims' remains were not found until 1983, leaving unanswered questions about the full extent of Dean Corll's potential victims. Hanley was ultimately convicted of 6 murders and sentenced to 6 life sentences for his role in the crimes. Brooks, on the other hand, was convicted of 1 murder and received a life sentence. Both men have been referred to as serial killers for their participation in the Hughes mass murders. Over the years, Hanley has remained a controversial figure, drawing outrage of creating a Facebook page and promoting his artwork from prison. He has also given interviews about the Candyman killer, expressing regret that he couldn't confront Dean personally. Elmer Wayne Hanley was featured in the 2nd season of Netflix crime drama series Mindhunter, portrayed by actor Robert Aramayo, known for his role in HBO's Game of Thrones. Meanwhile, Brooks led a quieter life behind bars, avoiding interviews and limited correspondence with Hanley. Brooks passed away in prison in 2020 due to COVID-19. As for Dean Corll, his notoriety endures, as he is remembered as one of Texas' most infamous serial killers. Many who crossed paths with him likely wished to erase any memory of their association with him. Dean Corll, the Candyman, concealed a reign of terror in 1970s Houston. With teenage accomplices, he brutally murdered at least 28 young men. Elmer Wayne Hanley eventually turned on Corll, ending the horror. Convicted for his role, Corll's legacy endures as one of Texas' most infamous serial killers. To stay updated on more stories and news, subscribe to our channel. Thanks for joining us, and keep exploring the world serial killers.